Hey everybody! Welcome to our penultimate class, our last lecture for this abbreviated semester. Congratulations to everybody who has managed to stay on track this far. You are almost done. I wanted to mention one thing, which is that several of you are having sort of weird Blackboard problems where, like, it's not letting you post one particular kind of assignment or what have you. And so I just wanted to kind of make a recommendation for everybody that um, if you are posting something onto Blackboard, to make sure that you have it saved somewhere else before you hit submit, in case it will not let you upload. And then to check, especially when you're uploading your annotated bibliography or your draft, check to make sure that the assignment actually did upload. And if it did not, please email it to me so that I have it, so that I don't inadvertently give you a 0 when you thought that you uploaded it. Okay, cool. So, let's talk about this essay. I wanted to mention one thing about the annotated bibliography. You're going to find this slide both under the PowerPoints but also under Reading and Resources Unit 3. This is just a sample annotated bibliography entry. You'll notice that it's really simple for those of you who haven't done yours yet. It's really seriously just APA style citation. Remember, you just go to Purdue OWL, the Purdue Online Writing Lab, for templates about APA style. It's the citation and then a couple of sentences, like a very short paragraph describing the source. That's it. It's all we want. And so you do that for at least 7 sources. That's it. It's a way for me to check in with you on your research. Okay. Just wanted to sort of get that in everybody's head. So this lecture is going to focus on information that might be useful, some strategies for actually writing this kind of monster paper. I know that many of you are feeling a little bit sort of nervous about writing a paper that is this long. It's 8 to 10 pages long, and remember that the draft needs to be at least 2/3 of that, which is what, like 6 pages. So and ideally, the draft will be the most useful to you if you get it to full length. So here, as someone who's had to write long stuff, a lot, here's my best advice. I would strongly recommend doing some advanced organizational thinking about a paper like this. This is the more sources you have and the more pages you have to write, the less likely you are able to just like sort of sit down and kind of let it go and wait for inspiration to happen and fill up some pages. Here's what I would do. I would try to break the paper into a couple of chunks, a couple of 2 to 3 page chunks. Y'all can write 2 to 3 pages, no problem. So if you figure out your main chunks, right, the main sort of issues or problems you want to address, the main sources you want to consider, that's gonna enable you to make the paper more manageable, right? Because 10 pages is what, just a little more than 3 3-page chunks. I'd really, really recommend using an outline of whatever sort works for you. A list, some kind of crazy, diagram, whatever. Just all I'm encouraging you to do is to think in advance about the organization. And go in with some notes to yourself about the organization of the paper, about what you're going to talk about the topics you're going to discuss, and also about the sources you're going to talk about. If you do that, you're going to have, I think that's really helpful in terms of combating writer's block, because you'll be able to refer to those notes, and if you get stuck on one of your chunks or one section or one source or whatever, you can always skip to the next one and then go back. So really, don't go in with nothing written down, right? Go in with an outline with some notes. I really wouldn't try to write a paper this long in one sitting, right? You might tackle a chunk at a time. It's really good to think of, when you're writing with this many sources, one thing that I think is useful is to think about yourself as explaining your sources and what they're saying, right? Think you're explaining your sources. That can certainly help. And then finally, don't forget the motto of our class, that a done draft is a good draft, right? It doesn't matter the state of that first draft is not important. What's important is that you get it out. Okay. Okay, so let's talk for a moment about approaching your research question. Since you're all at the stage where you've started finding your sources, and now you're sort of taking a step back and starting to sort of think about what to do with the material you're finding, how to answer your research question. Basically what we're doing at this stage is that we're gradually moving from research question to thesis, right? Which is to say, answering that question that you started with. And I want you guys to think about trying to be objective. Remember that this paper it's not an argumentative paper in the sense that, you are advocating for a specific side. It's not argumentative. So it's not like a pro-gun control paper or an anti-gun control paper, if that makes sense. That would be a merely argumentative paper, right? You'd set out merely to prove one side of an issue. It's not that, right? This is what I want you guys to do is to try to think like scholars. And scholars have to think objectively, like scientists, right? So our job is to look at all of the evidence and then to figure out what's going on, right? So you will have a thesis and you argue for that thesis, but that thesis is not merely like something is good or something is bad. It shouldn't be a simplistic thesis, right? An objective thesis is never going to be simple because, things in life simply are not simple. So instead of a formulation like X is bad or good, right? Try thinking in these terms. What effect does X have on Y? So someone, Karina, this might be you. You were going to write on the new sort of safe havens for people who have had infants that they can't or won't take care of anymore and dropping them off, right? So you don't want to approach that by just saying these safe havens are good or they're bad, because inevitably the real situation, if you're looking at it deeply and objectively, things are going to be way more complicated than that, right? So we don't want to let ourselves get into a bad or good sort of one-sided thing. Because remember, the way I talked about this research paper from the beginning is that you want to be looking at your issue from a number of different angles, right? We're trying to look at this question from the whole point of view, right? From every angle, right? So instead of thinking like, if you were going to write on like effects of social media on romantic relationships, we're probably not going to wind up with a thesis that's like social media is bad for relationships or good for relationships, but instead something that answers the question, what complex effects does social media have on romantic relationships? And we'll look at some examples in a second. So, your job here is to think objectively like a scholar, right? So I think that it's useful to think about this in terms of like a lawyer versus a judge, right? Like a lawyer, if you're a prosecuting attorney, your job is to try to convict the defendant no matter what, right? Even if you're not completely sure that he or she committed whatever crime, right? Like if there's evidence that might exculpate that person, you want to get that excluded because you're trying to convict, right? And if you're on the defense, it's the other way around, right? But you're advocating for a side. Whereas a judge or a jury has the responsibility to consider both sides, if that makes sense, right? So we want to think more like the judge, more like the jury, and less like the lawyer. So we want to consider the bad and the good to try to look at our topic from multiple angles. So you're going to have an argument, ultimately, a thesis, but you're not advocating for a side, if that makes sense. And this will be more or less easy to do with specific topics. So, but this is one of the points of having a draft, right? We'll figure it out. Okay, so let's look at some examples in terms of what this is going to mean for your thesis. So if there's another side, you want to address and incorporate it. So, for example, teen oversharing on Facebook is bad or good, right? That's a merely argumentative thesis that we do not want to wind up with. The second is a much more complex version. Teens overshare because the way people construct their identities has changed. They need to write about what they like and don't like in a public forum, rather than to bond in private with a close friend in order to establish who they are. So you'll see how much more, to me, that second one is so much more interesting and it's so much richer because it's not just someone, you're not just reading somebody's case for something, right? Somebody advocating for something they like or don't like. Instead, this promises to be an objective analysis that's going to prove a thesis, but in doing so, consider all the different sides, all the big factors that go into something. So not so much this, thumbs up or thumbs down, more like this, like a bunch of complicated stuff that we have to make our way through. So if you've find yourself moving towards a thesis that's thumbs up or thumbs down, start trying to complicate it. Okay, I will run out of time in this first chunk in just a minute, but I wanted to have a few more words about plagiarism, just because there have been a few potential misunderstandings. So remember that if you use a source's language but present it as your own, you're plagiarizing even if you cite your source. Okay, even if there's a citation, if you're using their language without quotation marks, that's plagiarism, right? So remember that if you use the source's exact language, you must use quotation marks. So an example. So the first one is good, second one, bad. All right. So first one, similarly, a study conducted by P et al. 2012 showed that, and then a quotation, people who frequently interact with people face to face seem to feel less need to use other media while doing so. Citation. Okay, those quotation marks signal to the reader that that language comes directly from the source. Same sentence without the quotation marks, that is an unethical use of a source, despite the fact that there's a citation. All right. So the citation does not, just the fact that you include a citation does not get you out of having to think about language, right? Of having to think about whether you're using the source's language or whether you're paraphrasing. Keep that in mind. Okay. Let's look at one example. So here's an abstract from a source. You guys have seen this if you've been looking at Academic Search Premier, these kinds of abstracts. This study focuses on exploring internet abuse among teenagers and its relations to some internet usage patterns and demographic characteristics in a digitalizing country, Turkey. It was designed as a cross-sectional research on 3 types of schools that differ in their academic performance. The data were collected from 1,380 high school students through a paper-based questionnaire. The results identify a small portion of students as internet abusers experiencing severe problems and 1/4 as possible abusers experiencing occasional problems in their lives. Excessive use, tolerance, preoccupation with the internet, and using the internet to escape from negative feelings were the most frequently reported symptoms of disturbed patterns of online behaviors. Okay, can stop it there. All right, so there's your abstract. If that's the abstract, then notice we have a citation, but this sentence is still going to be plagiarism. They surveyed 1,380 high school students, and some of the results showed that excessive use, tolerance, preoccupation with the internet, sounding familiar, right, guys? Using the internet to escape from negative feelings were the most frequently reported symptoms of disturbed patterns of online behaviors. So notice that what they did is they just pulled a big old hunk of language straight from this citation and included it without quotation marks. That is not a responsible use of a source. That is plagiarism. You need to either quote it or paraphrase it, right? Remember how we paraphrase. We read the original, we digest it, we understand, we put it away, and then we rephrase the idea in our own words. Okay, over and out, we're going to talk about APA in-text citations next.